say we can say a big warm welcome to the Becoming of Business. And I'm here with my dear brother from another mother, Ben Bowler. And it is just such a pleasure and honor. And I just feel so great sitting down with you, talking about the evolution of business. Can you help us put you on the map a little bit so other people kind of know where you're coming from? It's so cool.
Well, thank you, Linda. It's wonderful to be, as you say, sitting down and talking about the evolution of business with you. I'm honored and I'm really delighted and excited to be here. What an incredibly important conversation. Put me on the map. Well, I guess, is there one map or is there multiple maps? It's hard to know sometimes, but let's say that there's just one big map. So I am a business guy. I run a company called Health Max here in Australia. I'm the CEO of Health Max, and we're coming into our 12th year of business now. And we bring in a specific product out of the United States, which is healthy, nutritious cookware through a company called Regalware and a brand called Salad Master. And we're also a sales director for the region here in Australia, Indonesia, Malaysia, and New Zealand. We look after around about 40 independent dealerships. So I run a dealership with my business partner and our staff, and look after a region. So that's my business life. Direct sales is the industry. That's something I've been connected to most of my working life. Fascinating segment, direct selling. And it really, we'll speak to some more of this as we get into the conversation today. But it's I have a love and a passion for the direct sales industry. My other world is the world of intercultural harmony. In fact, they're quite connected, but in intercultural harmony, peace, spirituality, interfaith, and that all comes to life through a platform called Unity Earth, which is a network really devoted to empowering solutions for unity, purpose, and peace. And I'm honored to serve as the executive director of Unity Earth, which is a registered 501c3 in the United States and has registration here in Australia and a growing footprint around the world. So hopefully that's kind of sufficient to put me on the map to begin with.
You know, I really love that. And what I love about your being, except that you're brilliant and your heart is so big, is that you really represent two worlds that I also identify with, because I'm so much in the business world and I'm so much in this evolutionary world of really bringing our consciousness to a higher level. And that's why I choose to work with leadership, and you have integrated your worlds in such a, or maybe two legs in such a good body of work, and such exciting things coming out of Unity Earth. And one of the reasons I'm so excited to sit down and talk to you, and particularly, is that you have such deep understanding of both of these worlds. To your point, they're not separate, but the way that we treat them, and I think that the impression of those worlds are very different. Like, what the heck does peace and peace work have to do with business? You know, one is like kumbaya and the other one is making money, right? And so we're going to dive into this intersection, we can call it, but also, the big correlation between peace and business. And you and I have talked for years about how business has always been, from the very beginning, one of the reasons that nations have not been at war, because we have trade, and that's been so important for the development of the countries, right? And so we're not going to go to war with these guys because we need their saffron, you know, or whatever it might be. So, but then something interesting has happened. And with interesting, I mean sometimes concerning, because there's a level of violence that comes with the territory of being in business. You know, there's an aggression, there's violent actions, there's exploitation, and there's a disregard for human life and for Mother Earth and what have you. And so we're using, and we can even see it in business, like we use so many war terms between, deadlines and mobilizing, and we're talking about our competitors, but they're actually our enemies, right? Yeah.
Hostile takeovers. Yeah.
Hostile takeovers. That's right. And so it's kind of seeped into the way we just take business for granted is actually quite aggressive, although the start kind of felt more peaceful, and it had to do with prosperity. And so from your unique vantage point, where are your concerns right now? If we are looking at being here and moving forward, we know that we are already on a big trajectory of evolution. And as we are specifically talking about business, can you speak into the current trajectory and where you're kind of concerned that we're heading with this, with the current environment, whatever you want to put into that? I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, thank you, Linda. Thank you. These are big questions, really big explorations, and I think it behooves us and to really explore them together. And so I'm really grateful to you and the Becoming a Business and this whole series, exploring the evolution of business and the impact business is having and can have on the world. I think ultimately, in many indigenous wisdoms, and you and I are blessed to have incredible brothers and sisters and mentors from the indigenous world, both in North America, Australia, and around the world. Ultimately, boils down to, sometimes it boils through all the complexity of all of this, it boils down to two kind of human impulses that we get to choose between. Now, sometimes this is characterized as, the good wolf and the bad wolf, or whatever it may be, our lower nature and our better angels. And clearly you can see this in business. I mean, this has been described by different people in different ways. The will to dominate, the will to totally conquer. Riane Eisler has written much about this, the spirit of really wanting to dominate and to conquer, which has been so present throughout history. You can link it to the last few thousand years of the patriarchy, but it's everywhere. And whether it's the behavior of individuals, or whether it's the behavior of corporations, or whether it's the behavior of nation states, any entity can be operating from that will to dominate. Or there is, of course, the other alternative, which is that urge to partnership and the urge to connection and the urge to mutuality. So I think boiling it all down, there's those two basic kind of core elements that are a choice, they're a decision each time that we make. But when we look at the world, to your question, as it is at the moment, we've got to see that the will to dominate and the will to conquer seems to be incredibly prevalent around the world, and whether or not that's between ethnic groups, nation states, even potentially religions, but certainly from the idea of business as a sort of world domination, we now see that the corporations, the world's biggest corporations, are becoming more powerful than the majority of nation states. They are, in some senses, the new superpower. And so what's underneath it? What's the core intention? What's their purpose? What's their reason for being? Really becomes more important than ever. Is it to conquer and to dominate, or is it to serve? And I think more and more, we need to be asking that very question about what is the underlying intention and motivation of a company, and how is that impacting humanity? So I think if we're honest about it, we probably would come to the conclusion that while many companies these days want to look ethical and they want to, have their set of values on their websites and they want to be able to look a certain way as good corporate citizens, underneath it all, when you peel it away, there's still very much that will to dominate and will to power, which is ultimately their reason for being. So you can see that playing out, all around the world, not blaming business for everything. I think this is showing up in all aspects of human endeavor and life. It's just that business is such a powerful and potent one. And that spirit of domination and power seeking is having its impact all around the world in destruction, degradation, conflict, war, environmental chaos. I mean, we're well familiar with the results. And I think, that's the challenge for us today, is to really get back to these fundamental core questions of what is our purpose and what is our intention and what is it that we are truly trying to serve. Which of the masters are we serving? Are we serving the good wolf or are we serving the bad wolf? And I think that's really while that might be simplistic for some, I think that's what it boils down to generally.
Thank you. And there are so many things I'm thinking about in relation to this. And of course, we all have such a big part in shaping this, although most people don't feel like they have a big part in shaping this. But something that I see, I have sort of a couple of tracks that come up from what you're talking about. The first one is what we are looking at is really the definition of results. Because some of the pushback I get when people are talking to me about having much more of a mindful approach to leadership, collaborative, inclusive, kind, empathetic, and all of these things that we honestly know by now is the way forward to make this world still sustainable. But the pushback has to do with, well, as a leader, pushing people to the brink and really getting the best out of them, that brings such great results. You can't argue with the results that come from pushing. My response usually is, well, that depends on how we define results. Can you speak into that a little bit? Because I think this is a huge key into, and if we now talk about corporate, and then we can leave entrepreneurship for later, because I think that's a very interesting, up and comer here in the world. But there are a lot of people who feel hopeless in the corporate system because of the way that key performance index, it's like or indicators, like how do we measure performance? How do we measure results? And it goes back to a lot of the reporting, etc. What's your take there? Because something's got to change, right? If nothing changes, where are we heading and what can change? What say you?
Yeah, well, that's so true. That's so true, Linda. I mean, if we don't change direction, we'll end up exactly where we're going, I think is a kind of variation of a Chinese saying, but it's incredibly true. If we don't change tack, we will end up exactly where we're going, which is, I think everybody can sense that's not a good place to be going. So I think, part of the challenge here is that there's a lot about what business does globally at the corporate level that you're speaking of, which is incredibly effective. And I don't think that what we mean by serving a high purpose or being in service to humanity means becoming all soft and woolly and letting people kind of like not perform. That's not what it means. I think you mentioned earlier the idea of integral theory, which has got so much in it. But one of the things that I think we need to take out of it is all of those effective things about business which work can be incorporated into a new system. I think we're not talking purely just about compassion and kindness. I think we're talking ultimately about wisdom. And wisdom doesn't always just give people a free pass. It doesn't mean people are left unaccountable when they fail to live up to what they're supposed to be doing. Wisdom can be quite harsh at times as well. So just to be really clear, we're not just talking about warm and soft and fuzzy business. We're talking about hard reality, but taking the wisdom of what works. And you know what? Competition works. That competition for humans is a healthy thing. I tell you, I'm in the direct sales industry. We run competitions all the time. And people want to win. And they want to win. And that's a good thing. And people want to make more money for their families. And that's not a bad thing. As long as it's contained within an overarching higher purpose to serve rather than just to enrich the board or the shareholders or whatever it may be. So I think part of it is understanding what we're saying and what we're not saying. And how do we then bring the spirit of a healthy, disciplined, competitive environment into a higher ideal, an intention of actually making the world better. And you see it's around the world. There are genuine entrepreneurs and businesses that are really intent on trying to make the world better. Now, maybe some of their ideas are better than others, but you can still see now, in a certain level, the turning of the tide, that meaning is becoming a kind of a new wealth. And people want to have impact. And successful people want to have and leave a legacy. This is good. This is part of the sort of the shifting, if you're trying, the key indicators that are this turning of the wheel away from. I remember we grew up in the 80s, Linda, and wealth was how many Ferraris and holiday houses and opulence and all that stuff. Now that's still there, but there are more and more people that have got their philanthropic foundations, and they've got their social projects, and they've got their programs that they're working to make the world better. We are on the curve of turning this around, but we need to accelerate. And the ways that we can do that, and you can see it through some of these movements, through consumer movements holding corporations to account, consumer choice, people electing not to purchase certain or even in business to business choices. You see now some of the platforms are losing advertising money because people don't agree with some of the statements of the key people involved. More and more of this is kind of moving in the right direction, in the sense of there's a feedback loop. When companies do the right thing, they can continue to do well. When they are making missteps, that can affect their bottom line. So I think that the hope is that we can accelerate this, we can empower this, we can really, pull together a coalition of private, for-profit, non-for-profit, global grassroots movements that can really rise to the occasion to continue to accelerate this turning around, where service and improving the world and leaving a lasting positive impression on the world are the primary focus. And then within that, you've got all the other aspects. Of course, companies need to make a profit. Of course, the more profitable they are, the more impactful they can be. So just that is happening within a broader context of philosophy that is driven to improve the world. So I think, just in closing, to your points about how do we, what are we measuring, and how does that impact the overall impact of a company? I think it's just small tweaks. You don't have to throw everything out. When we're looking for competitive, high performance businesses, but ones that are part of a global community that is leaving the world in a better place. And heaven knows that is so important right now. We need the power of business. We need the full force of global business to be on side for turning this planet around urgently. And one thing I will say, that's really important, the intersection perhaps between peace and the intercultural aspect of this. Linda, we see now in the world sort of a growing tribalism as things become more uncertain, as there's more, uncertainty into the security of people's individual and group lives. There's much more of a retreat into our ethnic, nationalistic, tribalistic identities. And, one thing that is really powerful about global business and trade is it's, as you mentioned earlier, but how powerful it is for international trade to really be a part of breaking down these intercultural suspicions, these uncertainties, the unknown of the other. In our global business, we don't see that. We don't see countries. We don't see ethnicities. We don't see races. Everyone is part of a global market. And there's a kind of a neutrality about that, which is really, really important. So global business is absolutely part of the solution. International trade, intercultural collaboration and trade and exchange is absolutely part of the solution for us as a planet as we go forward. And it needs to be empowered and needs to be encouraged to evolve into a good direction, which is why it's so important, this series that you're convening with the evolution of business to becoming a business.
Thank you. And this speaks so much right into peace, just as you were saying. I'm just taking a little time to absorb that, because there are many layers to look at this. One of the one of the misconceptions about making this turn that you're talking about, and I'm so glad that you were clicking on it, and I'm going to double click on it, which is that we don't have to throw out the stuff that works with business. We don't have to stop making money. It's not about everybody singing Kumbaya, although, that's a catchy song. But I do think we tend to dismiss things we don't understand, and especially if it's asking us to throw away things that we feel safe from, right? So the way I see it is really building a taller building. And when you build a taller building and you come to the 8th floor and the 9th floor and the 10th floor, it doesn't mean that you get rid of the 2nd and the 3rd floor. You actually build on what you already have. Which leads me to the next thing that popped up as you were talking about this, which is the beauty of global trade and business is that is really reflecting a world view that has to do with the consciousness development that is with a world view where you actually see the world. Whereas these different factions that are happening in this extremism that's happening, that's an ethnocentric type worldview instead of the world-centric that we find in global business. And so business really has an even bigger impact and a bigger responsibility, I should say, when it comes to developing consciousness from the egocentric through the ethnocentric. That's when we compete against other groups, and we understand that there's a group and we have evolved from the egocentric, but we're still very, very much us against them. Whereas with global business, we have this world-centric view. And this is an important part of consciousness development in order for us to keep up with evolution. Evolution, another way of saying evolution is to say more and more complex. That is the nature of evolution. And so as business gets more and more complex, leadership is getting more and more complex, it requires more and more of us as people being in business and leading business. And so that comes back to something that you and I talk a lot about, which is the individual development and why we even bother with personal growth, why we even look at reflective or even contemplative space within to grow, because that is what consciousness development is actually asking of us now, to keep up with the complexity of work and the world and being good in business, so it kind of makes a bit of a full circle. Would you like to comment into the individual development space? Because I know you have so much to say in that regard.
Well, thank you, Linda. And just to triple click on what you were saying before, I thought you said
let's triple click.
You said that I think very eloquently, and that there's deep truth in what's being shared about the role of business at the global level for world peace. And evolution is more complexity. It's also more integration and more harmony, and it's bringing together things that were in conflict in a way that is integrating them into a greater whole. And so we talk about the evolution of consciousness as a whole, and that's really interesting, and that's ultimately the big story. But then what's the relationship to the individual within that? Does everybody just evolve, kind of at the same rate? And I think that what's crucial is this connection between the evolution of the whole and the individual, as you were referencing in the question, and the interrelation between them. Are we products of our culture as individuals, or are we cultural creatives? Are we creating culture as individuals? And of course, the answer is a interwoven chicken and the egg kind of style reality, where we are both products of our culture, very much so. And we are contributing to the emergence and the never-ending creation of culture as individuals, and particularly as individuals that are growing more empowered and whose capacity is increasing. And I think apart from perhaps profound spiritual experience, I don't think there's anything as powerful as business and entrepreneurship to empower the individual. Of course, education is another aspect of that as well. But just focusing on the empowerment of the individual through entrepreneurship, it's profound. People's life changes. Their ability to not just look after their family, but to impact society increases tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold as they go on their entrepreneurial journey. We talked before about individuals who are able to set up philanthropic endeavors and foundations, all that kind of stuff. This is usually and often through the evolution of them as entrepreneurs, right? So as the entrepreneur is able to become increasingly successful, always through a series of ups and downs. It's not a straight line. There are many setbacks. There are many. It's a hell of a journey, the entrepreneurial journey. It is by definition self-development, and you don't need to become wildly successful billionaire to become an empowered individual through the entrepreneurial journey. There are many people who, through their contact with the entrepreneurial journey, have become extraordinary, change makers in their own right, connecting through networks to others around the world in this extraordinary invisible web of relationships, which is so powerful. It's so powerful and gives so much potential yeast for the evolution of global culture. So I think the relationship between the individual and the whole is really the juice in all of this. And the more we can develop our entrepreneurial selves, and I believe that ultimately it's part of human nature to be entrepreneurial. If you look in, developing countries, India, Nepal, Africa, you often see the women have got some kind of micro industry that they do, they make, they create, is produced. It doesn't matter what level people are at. There is a sort of a part of the human which is called to be entrepreneurial at some level. So I think that's part of our instinct, and really releasing that, embellishing that, and unleashing that potential on the world for micro and macro entrepreneurs globally, particularly if there's a value shift, and that the higher purpose really doesn't need to exclude personal maintenance and home maintenance and financial gain, but as long as it includes also some essence of contribution to the whole, I think there is great hope in that.
I love that. And this really brings us to this vision of Ben. It's like, if you can, because what you have described for us is a future and an evolution that sets us on a track for meaning, it's almost like we're introducing a different ingredient in our decision making, where it's so easy, we easily become blinded in business because we haven't really questioned why we do what we do, because the way that we've measured success of business so far has been very much monetarily. And now we're bringing in this meaning and being of service. And I love you can feel that empowerment of the individual. Now, part of the reason why I love integral theory is that it has proven, by looking at consciousness development, hundreds of studies, they have come to the conclusion that the individual consciousness development is actually separate. There are corollaries, of course, between, but the individual consciousness development is different from the group consciousness development. And I think the easiest way of understanding that is that you can have a Buddhist monk who's enlightened on an individual level, but have a terrible view of women. So in a structure, like how we function as a group, and the group consciousness is very low in that individual, but they've reached enlightenment on an individual level, right? So, the collective versus the the individual. It is often that these things kind of go hand in hand, but I think it speaks back to what you're saying about the individual empowerment being so important as we move all of these pieces forward in evolution, so that we look at, one way of looking at it is macro and micro, but also to really be specific about that and saying it has to do with your unique reason for being here, because it's only when you connect with that you can connect to service that matters. And then you can translate that into this collective effort where, of course, the first thing you have to check when you get together with a bunch of other people to do business is if your values and vision are matching, and that's a good place to start. And as we're wrapping up, of course, I could speak to you forever about this because it's so interesting. But in the interest of time, is there anything else that you want to put into this space where we're talking about this extraordinary power of business and this really passion and joy in business, relating to peace, relating to anything that's on your heart? What would you like to add to all of this?
Well, thank you, Linda. I mean, there is a deep spiritual dimension, I think, to business, and perhaps it's an underexplored relationship. And again, grateful to you for opening the doorway to explore it further. But this relationship between the spiritual world and money, God and money, is kind of an interesting way to put it. But I do think that there is a correlation, an underexplored one, between a life of service or a life of a calling, and the role of business on the planet. And you meet a lot of. I mean, I've had the pleasure of meeting a lot of very successful people who absolutely would say that their life is touched by their faith and by their spiritual relationship to a higher power, by whatever names or concepts people want to, frame it as. But that has been a driving factor in their life and in their entrepreneurial journey, and in their business life and in their corporate life. So I think that relationship between our deepest convictions of the spirit and our life in a commercial reality is something that may seem worlds apart. Often I think maybe part of the traditions, we grew up in a Judeo-Christian tradition, was, money is the root of all evil. There's all sorts of weird concepts that are kind of caught up in part of our cultural stories that I think need to be refreshed and reframed and re-energized and remade. And so this is a part of that process. And I think, for me, there really is no hope of a enlightened global civilization that's divorced from God. There is, now I'm not talking about a particular religion's version of God. I'm talking about the higher power of reality, creator, source of the universe, by whatever framework people can connect to that or do connect to that. And I know many people don't, and that's a reality too. But for me, if you're asking about my vision, I think that's an essential, foundational, primary part of the solution, is that we need, we have to get into right relationship with the original source of life, and in that the abundance, and the blessing, as Jesus said, I came that they would have life more abundantly. I think there is great potential in exploring that, the fruitfulness of the earth, the extraordinary, resources of creation that are at our disposal, that are our inheritance. I think there's a huge, huge joy to be found in exploring the relationship between these big, big powers of the deepest faith and the power of money, and how they can become in harmony and serving a collective goal of a abundant, fruitful, joyful planetary civilization, which we are planting seeds for and watering, and who knows how it all comes about, Linda. But underneath it all, there is a conviction and a faith that that is the destiny of our planet. And we're working, as many, many people are, diligently, gently, humbly towards the fulfillment of a more beautiful vision for our earth.
Sign me up. And as you were talking, I was just thinking about and feeling about the word abundance. And I think that our job now is to extract the greed and the exploitation from the idea of money, because there's nothing evil in money. It's an energy, an exchange, then we're left with abundance. And in abundance, we also find that meaning. So I think that you're called to mind shift, and your call to action is so right on target, and definitely something that I think we can all truly feel and fold into what we're doing, because this is the time. There's no better time than right now to make these tweaks. And what we're saying very clearly, both you and I, standing with one foot in business and one foot in an interspiritual unity world, we're really saying that there are these small tweaks necessary. We don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't have to completely change everything. I'm so grateful to sit down with you today, Ben. And where do we find out more about Unity Earth? Because obviously it's a very inclusive, very important organization. And anyone who's curious about Unity Earth, how can we find out more?
Yeah, thank you, Linda. We got heaps happening and going on through Unity Earth and our global partners around the world doing amazing collaborative projects. You can just go to unity.earth and navigate through, and there are things to connect with and join and sign up and be connected. So unity.earth is the URL.
Beautiful. We got it. Unity.earth. And again, I want to thank you, Ben. This has been extraordinary. What an important conversation to have and to continue. Thank you again.
Been a pleasure, Linda. Thank you.